The scripture reading this morning is coming from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 8. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 8. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way, but is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for the prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will all pass away.
Thank you, Keegan. May God bless the reading of His Word. Good morning. I'm glad to see each of you here this morning. This is a holiday weekend, of course. Our country celebrates our birthday tomorrow, and I pray that you enjoy the time that you spend, whether with family or friends. There were a few times as the girls were growing up that I would read the Declaration of Independence to them to remind them of what the 4th of July is about. I also think it's important, and this is not the sermon this morning, but it kind of relates to the sermon. I also think it's important for us to understand why some people don't view the flag with the same type of respect that we do. We'll fly our flag tomorrow with pride, hopefully the right kind of pride and the good things that our country has done over the years. But in Jewel's senior year at Freed-Hardeman, she wrote a research paper on the Native Americans' view of the land as it was expressed in poetry. Now, I'm not a fan of poems. I'm a fan of Jewel, not a fan of poems, but I like history. And so ever since I read her research paper, I've read probably 12 or 15 books on the Native Americans in the last year to try to understand their perspective. And I think that's what's important for us to understand other people's perspective. If you think about an Indian, a Native American camp that was invaded by American soldiers flying the American flag, killing innocent men, women, and children. Now, the Native Americans committed crimes against innocent people as well, so I'm not defending all of their actions. But when innocent people are killed by people flying the American flag, maybe we can understand why some people don't see the flag the way we do. Now, to me, the American flag symbolizes freedom, and it should symbolize freedom for everybody under the flag. It's for that concept that we have sent men and women to battle who've shed their blood so that other people could have freedom. I think that's what the flag symbolizes to most of us. And for that, we are grateful. Let's get into our study this morning. The country music group Alabama have a song called 5 O'Clock 500, where it compares getting off work and headed home to a car race. And you're on the freeway, and the traffic is heavy, is busy. The boss is giving you the green flag, and you get out there, and you're trying to get home as fast as possible, but you're stuck because traffic is so heavy. There was a man who was experiencing that kind of thing, and it was making him mad. The red lights and the heavy traffic, the people who would cut you off in order to get just a few inches ahead of you, all of that was making him mad. And he would try to get in front of somebody else so he could get home faster. And when he got home, his nerves were a wreck. He did not have any patience with his wife and his children, and his life was just miserable. And then he heard a sermon on self-control. And he decided that he was going to change his view, his mentality about getting home. And so he decided he was going to stop trying to rush. If somebody gets in front of him, he's not going to get mad. If a red light pops up in front of him, he's not going to lose his patience. And he found the first time he did that, that he got home only 2 minutes later. But his mentality was completely different. The change in his mentality was a difference between day and night. He had patience with his wife and he had patience with his children, and the whole rest of the night went entirely different. As we continue our study on the art of loving this year, first Sunday of every month, today we're going to talk about love is not provoked. Now that idea there is expressed in lots of different ways. Love does not wear its feelings on its sleeve. Love does not have a short fuse. Love does not hold a grudge. And so let's think about that idea this morning as we compare our loving attitude towards that of Jesus Christ. Now, the first Sunday of every month, of course, we mention those who are celebrating anniversaries this month, which I think it was Rachel's idea. Anytime I share a good idea, it wasn't mine. So we celebrate anniversaries with Andy and Pam this month, celebrate an anniversary. Brian and Leah Henson, Norbert and Joyce Dlugo-Kinski, John and Diane Cox, Clayton and Flora Cruz, Tom and Rhonda Miller, Todd and Amy Schultz, and Trent and Betty Joe have their anniversaries this month. And this month we will have a wedding in our church family at Jackson Grove and Nora July. Pledge their love for each other in a couple of weeks. So those are the marriages that we celebrate this month. Love is not easily provoked. You recall that James, the Lord's brother, says, "Now this you know, brethren, but every man should be quick to hear and slow to speak and slow to anger, because the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God." And so we need to work on being patient with other people, because patience is the best way to live. The art of loving means that we're going to be patient with our spouses and with our children, with our co-workers, with strangers, and especially with our church family. In Proverbs chapter 29 and verse 11, the wise man says, "The fool always loses his temper, but the wise man holds it back." So if we're the kind of person who loses our temper easily, God puts us in the category of fools. Let's work on it. What does the Bible say? First of all, why do we become angry? Why do we get angry? Here's a list of some of the reasons. Maybe it doesn't describe you, but here's a list of some of the reasons why we get angry. First of all, we get angry when we feel like people disrespect us. You and I have a view in our minds of the way other people ought to treat us. And if they don't treat us the way we feel like they ought to treat us, then we get mad. Sometimes that anger is justified. We'll talk about justified anger in just a moment. But a lot of times it's not. A lot of times this kind of anger happens because we tend to be self-centered. It's our ego that has gotten hurt. We tend to be conceited, and so we want people to treat us the way we think they ought to treat us. And so we get angry. Why do we get angry? Number two, because we think our rights have been violated. Once again, we think that we are entitled. We think we're entitled to certain things. We're entitled to good health. We're entitled to happiness. We think that we're entitled to good health. We think we're entitled to these different things. But family, we need to remind ourselves that these are not rights. They are privileges. They are blessings from God. And so if we can change our mentality into understanding that these things are privileges that God has granted to us, not rights, then it helps us not to get so angry when somebody doesn't treat us the way we think they should. The Hebrew writer reminds us in Hebrews chapter 11 that there are a lot of followers of God who weren't treated right. They were not treated properly. They were not treated the way they thought they ought to be treated. You know, you and I live in a country, in fact, most of the Western world lives in societies where we have all kinds of conveniences. And then we get mad when those conveniences aren't exactly what we expect. We live in a society that is the envy of the majority of the world, but then when we don't get those things that we think we're entitled to, we get mad. Listen to the words of the Apostle Peter in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 12 and 13. Peter says, "Brethren, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal among you, which comes on you for your testing, as though some strange thing has happened to you. But as long as you suffer for the sake of Christ, keep on rejoicing, so that the revelation of His glory you can rejoice with great exultation." You see, Peter is reminding his audience, his Christian audience, that suffering for the sake of Christ is a good thing. And so we may need to change the way we view life and understand that the things that we have are given to us by God as a blessing and not something we're entitled to. Why do we get mad? Sometimes we get mad because we have learned that we get rewarded for our anger. You know anybody like that? Is there somebody in your family or your sphere of influence who gets their way because they get mad? That's the reason why a lot of people get mad, because people around them give in to their anger and they give them what they want. Now, what's the end result of that? What is the end result of a personality that gets what it wants because it loses its temper? Destroyed relationships. That's the end result of trying to get what we want by blowing our top, by losing our temper. We get what we want, but we lose the relationship. Or we lose the respect that people might have for us. We cause people to dig in their heels and to become more resistant to us. And so that's not a healthy way to have a relationship. It's not a good way to develop our relationship. In fact, it's a very poor way of reflecting Jesus in our lives. Let me offer you some questions to ask about our control, specifically of our anger. First of all, let's ask ourselves the question, how often do we get mad? How often do we get mad? You know, Solomon had said, as we saw back in Proverbs chapter 29 and verse 11, that the fool gets mad, loses his temper always. If we love like Jesus loved, however, we're going to control our anger better. We're going to have a more even temper and not let just every little thing make us mad. Again, are you around people that get mad at the smallest things? To go back to the illustration that I began with, the man in the heavy traffic. You can get mad because of the red light, and you can get mad because people are driving slow, and you can get mad because people jump in front of you. You can get mad at every little thing, and if you're traveling with somebody like that, by the time you get to your destination, your nerves are wrecked. Because those kind of people are just no fun to be around. How often do we get angry? Number two, what things make you angry? What are those things that make you angry? If we're going to love like Jesus loved, then we're going to be angry the way Jesus was angry. What was it that Jesus got angry about? Jesus got angry about big things. He got angry about things that affected people's relationship with his Father in heaven. He got angry because people did not honor his Father. He got angry because people didn't honor the truth from his Father. Jesus got angry when people who were innocent got hurt. What makes us angry? Do we get angry the way Jesus got angry? There's a story told about an Indian religious leader in a village in India. There was a big cobra that kept biting people as they went to the temple. And so this religious leader, the Swami, went to talk to the cobra. And he told the cobra, he says, you don't need to bite people when they go to the temple. And so he told the cobra to stop it. So the cobra quit. But then when the people realized that the cobra was not biting them, then they started abusing the cobra. They would grab him and they would carry him down the trail, and the little boys would abuse that cobra. And then the Swami went to visit the cobra sometime later, and he asked the cobra how things were going, and the cobra was bruised and he was beaten and it was bleeding. And the cobra said, ever since I stopped biting people, they've been mistreating me. And the Swami said, well, I told you you couldn't bite people. I didn't tell you you couldn't hiss. You know, sometimes it's okay for us to hiss. It's okay sometimes for us to be angry if we get angry at the right things. That's the control that you and I have to have over our temper. Mark chapter 11, verses 15 through 17 is an account of the life of Jesus that you're familiar with. Jesus and his apostles come into Jerusalem, and Jesus enters the temple. And he begins to drive out those who were buying and selling in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. And he began to teach them and to say, is it not written that my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples, but you have made it a robber's den? You see, Jesus got mad. Jesus got angry because man was not respecting his Father's place of worship. Here's the third question we need to ask ourselves. How long do we stay angry? How long do we stay angry? Because if we're the kind of person that carries a grudge, that nurses a grudge in our hearts towards someone, then we become unforgiving. And not only have we been guilty perhaps of getting angry without a cause, but if we're unforgiving, then we've added another sin on the top of that one. Listen to the words of the wise man in Proverbs 17 and verse 14. He says, the beginning of strife is like letting out water, so abandon the quarrel before it breaks out. Do you remember 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, the Eatonville Dam in Midland broke? There were 10,000 people that had to leave that area, and thousands of homes and businesses were destroyed at an estimated cost of $250 million. The report was released in May of this year. It's no surprise to any of us that the report showed that there wasn't any one person or one group that was responsible for that dam breaking, but it was decades of neglect. Decades of people who could have done something and chose not to do something. You see, in Proverbs chapter 17 and verse 14, the wise man tells us that not controlling our temper is like a crack in the dam. The beginning of strife is like letting out water. And so Solomon says, abandon the quarrel before it breaks out. We need to work on controlling our temper before it controls us. And so, as we continue, we realize that we simply can't say everything that comes to our minds. We can't say everything. My dad used to say, son, you need to put your brain into gear before you put your mouth into motion. Solomon said it this way in Proverbs 15 and verse 28. Solomon says, the wise man ponders how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours out evil things. Do you see that? Do you see the contrast? The heart of the righteous person ponders how to answer. We don't need to say everything that comes into our minds. And before we spew out something that we're going to regret, that's going to destroy a relationship with somebody, that's going to hurt our influence for Jesus Christ, we need to ask ourselves, is this the right thing to say? Is it the right thing to do? Because loving hearts are slow to become angry, but quick to get rid of it. Loving hearts do not hold grudges. Loving hearts look for opportunities to strengthen a relationship, not to weaken a relationship. Loving hearts don't meditate on how to get even with someone. Loving hearts that love like Jesus loves doesn't make mountains of resentments out of molehills of minor irritations. And that's why the Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 26 and 27, be angry, but do not sin. Don't let the sun go down on your wrath. And don't give the devil an opportunity. You see, family, it's possible, and here's the spiritual danger about anger. It's possible for us to give the devil an opening into our hearts through our anger that allows him to bring his wicked baggage into our lives. In that same chapter, Ephesians 4 and verse 31, Paul says, let all bitterness and anger and wrath and clamor and slander be put away from you along with all malice. That's the command of Jesus Christ, where he calls us to love like he loves. Family, anger hurts us. Anger hurts our mentality. Because when we get angry, we tend not to think clearly. And that's why we say things that we regret. Because anger affects how we think, and we stop thinking clearly. Anger also lessens the respect that people have for us, and so anger hurts us in our relationships with other people. Anger also, of course, affects us physically. It can contribute to hernias and strokes and heart attacks and other health problems. Worst of all, anger hurts us spiritually. Anger affects our relationship with God. You see, not only do we sin against God when we get angry with someone that's not justified, but then we tend to do things, or we hold a grudge, or we don't forgive, and so we're actually not committing one sin, we're committing a pile of sins. And anger will keep us out of heaven. And so we need to grasp that concept that we don't need to let the sun go down on our anger. So let me conclude this morning in this study with some suggestions. If you're the kind of person that struggles with this quality of love that's not easily provoked, let me offer you some suggestions. Number one, admit you've got a sin that needs to be resolved. Until we admit that we have a problem, we're never going to do anything about it. Other people around us know that we're fools. We've got to admit it, that we're acting foolishly, and do something to control it. So the first thing that we need to do in learning how to control our anger is to recognize that we have a problem. The second thing that we can do is to pay attention to our bodies. You know, God has given us physical indications that we're beginning to lose our temper. Our heart rate increases. We might start getting sweaty in the palms of our hands. Those are physical indications that something is going on inside that I need to be aware of. I need to pay attention to it so that I can make sure that I control what I'm about to do and say. Because the last thing I want to do is sin against God. Number three, we can force ourselves to smile. You know, it's hard to smile and be angry at the same time. You know what else is also hard to do? It's hard to pray from your heart for somebody you're mad at. Things start changing. When you start taking the name of the person who's angered you to the throne of God's grace, it changes the way you look at things. In fact, that's something else that we can do to help us learn to control our anger, and that is change what we're doing at that moment. This is where it might be a situation where we have to walk away from what has been causing us to get mad. Before we sin against God, maybe we need to leave the situation that we're in. Now, it might be a situation that we need to come back to. Parents should be careful about disciplining their children when you're experiencing a fit of anger, because sometimes we can step over the line and do something that's not right. So it might be a case where we need to walk away from that situation, but our child might still need to be punished, and we'll come back later once we've got control of our spirit. What can we do to learn to control our anger? We can look at ourselves and the response that we're giving to other people. How do other people view us? Is the response that I have right now, is it appropriate for the situation? Is it appropriate for the person I'm engaging with? Look at ourselves the way other people look at us. How are they viewing us right now? And is my behavior going to help that relationship, or is it going to hurt that relationship? We need to change our belief system. You know, that man that I started with talking about getting mad in traffic, the traffic problems didn't change. The light still turned red. There were still people who cut him off in traffic. There was still congestion, heavy traffic on the roads. None of that changed. The situation didn't change. What changed? His belief system. He changed the way he was thinking. He changed the way he looked at things. And for him and for most of us, that would work. We get mad because the way we view things. And so if we change the way we view things, we won't get mad so much. And the last thing I would suggest to control our anger is to learn to live one day at a time. One day at a time. I think that's the essence of Paul's words in Ephesians chapter 4 when he says, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Get over the problems that you have one day at a time. When Rachel and I when we were preparing to get married, Rachel's grandmother, she said, she's from Georgia, she said, y'all don't need to be mad at the same time. And that's good advice. I said, okay, Mama, I'll be mad on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and Rachel will be mad on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, and we'll both be happy on Sunday. One day at a time. Listen to the words of Solomon once again in Proverbs 15 and verse 1. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Family, we can control our relationships if we control ourselves. If we control the words coming out of our mouths, and if we control the thoughts going through our minds. And we can learn how to love like Jesus loved. The Apostle Paul lists anger and wrath as works of the flesh. And Paul says very clearly, people who engage in these behaviors will not go to heaven. That should scare us. If we're the kind of person that has trouble controlling our anger, those words should scare us. We need to control our anger. Patience. Patience with our family members. Patience with our coworkers. Patience with strangers. Especially patience with fellow Christians. Let's work on that, because we don't want it to cause us to miss out on heaven. If you need prayers, if you need encouragement from your church family, if you need to become a Christian this morning and be forgiven of the sins you've committed up to this point, if you need Christ's blood to wash your sins away, whatever we can do to help you in your service to Jesus Christ, let us know. Let's stand and sing together.